Hello and welcome to edupediaworld.com. Today in this section we'll be discussing about analysis of consumer demand. That is, we'll be discussing about the theory of demand. As we all know that necessity is the mother of invention. Similarly, demand is the mother of production. Increasing demand for a product offers high business prospects for it in future, whereas declining demand for a product diminishes its business prospects. For example, increasing demand for computers, cars, mobile phones, etc. in India has enlarged the business prospects for both domestic and foreign companies selling these goods. Whereas declining demand for black and white TV sets and manual typewriters is forcing their companies to switch over to modern substitutes or else go out of business. Thus, to start with, let's first understand that what exactly demand is. Demand, basically, in order to say that a want is a demand, there should be three attributes. That is, there should be desire to buy that commodity, there should be willingness to pay for that commodity, and there should be ability to pay for that commodity. For example, if I want iPhone 6, because I want it, so I have a desire to buy iPhone 6. I also have the willingness to pay for iPhone 6, but I don't have the proper money resources, I don't have the finances in order to pay for iPhone 6. Thus, my want, my desire of iPhone 6 will not create a demand. Similarly, if suppose I have the desire to buy the product and also I have the ability to pay for it, but I am a miser, I don't want to spend so much money, this particular thing will also not create a demand. But in a case where I have the desire plus the willingness to pay for the product plus the ability to pay for it, then that particular want becomes a demand. If I have to complete a statement regarding the demand for a commodity, it should contain the following things. That is, the quantity demanded of a commodity, the price at which commodity is demanded, the time period over which a commodity is demanded, the market area in which a commodity is demanded. For example, if I say that the annual demand of TV sets in London at an average price of $15,000 is 50,000 pieces. Now this particular statement is complete in terms of what is the demand of TV sets, because it is telling about the time period in which the commodity is demanded, it is telling about the area in which the commodity is demanded, it is telling about the price at which the commodity is demanded, and it is also telling about the quantity of the commodity demanded. Thus, a meaningful statement regarding the demand for a commodity should contain the following, that is, quantity demanded, price, time period, and market area. Then it will become meaningful for a business organization. A business manager should understand the following aspects of demand for their products. That is, why a product is being demanded. What are the determinants of demand? How do buyers decide the quantity of a product to be purchased? How do the buyers respond to change in product prices, their incomes, and prices of related goods? And how can the market demand for a product forecasted? Then only he can go into a right business prospect and his business will be a success. In order to understand consumer demand, we should first understand that what utility exactly is. Consumer demand a product because they derive or expect to derive some utility from it. The expected utility from a commodity is the basis of demand for it. Though utility is a term of common usage, it has a specific meaning and use in the analysis of consumer demand. Utility basically is the psychological feeling of satisfaction, pleasure, happiness, or well-being which a consumer derives from the consumption, possession, or the use of a commodity. As we can measure height, length, weight, distance, etc., it is assumed that utility is measurable and provides data regarding the amount of satisfaction provided to a consumer. As we have come to know that utility is the sense of satisfaction which is derived from a product by a consumer, thus utility in the sense of satisfaction is a subjective or relative concept because a commodity need not be useful to all. For example, cigarette is not at all useful to non-smokers, whereas non-veg is also not at all useful to hardcore vegetarians. Then utility of a commodity varies from person to person and from time to time. Maybe chocolate is I derive a lot of satisfaction from consumption of chocolate. Maybe to other person it is not at all useful. He might not like chocolate. A commodity need not have the same utility for the same consumer at different points of times, at different levels of consumption, and for different moods of a consumer. For example, I derive maximum satisfaction from the consumption of a food product when I am very hungry. Whereas when I'm not hungry, I just want to have some snacks, I might not derive the same level of satisfaction from the same product, from the usage of same product. Now, in order to understand the concept of utility, we now turn to some quantitative concepts related to utility used in utility analysis, that is total utility and marginal utility. Assuming utility is measurable and additive, total utility may be defined as the sum of the utility derived by a consumer from the various units consumed of a good or service over a period of time. Now suppose a consumer consumes 4 units of a commodity X. The commodity which he is consuming is X and he consumes 4 units. The utility derived from first unit is U1. The utility derived from second unit is U2. The utility derived from consumption of third unit is U3 and the utility derived from the consumption of fourth unit is U4. Thus, if I have to calculate the total utility of the product X, it will be equal to U1 plus U2 plus U3 plus U4, which will give me the total utility from the consumption of product X. Now suppose, as we all know, we not only just consume one product, we consume n number of products. So if a consumer consumes n number of commodities, his total utility, that is, I can say total utility from consumption of n number of commodities, will be equal to utility from product consumption of product X plus utility from consumption of product Y plus utility from consumption of product Z plus utility up to consumption of product N. This will give me total utility from consumption of n number of products. Now we come to the concept of marginal utility. Marginal utility is another very important concept in economic analysis. It can be defined as the addition to total utility resulting from consumption of one additional unit. Thus, if I have to say that what is marginal utility, it is basically the change in total utility which is resulted after the change in the quantity or units consumed of a commodity. So say for example, the total utility from consumption of 1 unit of apple was 60 and total utility from consumption of 2 units of apple was 80. Thus, marginal utility from consumption of apple will be equal to change in total utility, that is 80 minus 60, divided by the units change in the units consumed or quantity consumed, that is 2 minus 1. So it will be equal to 20. In other ways, we can say that marginal utility when the number of units consumed is n, when the total number of units consumed is n, then marginal utility from n units will be equal to total utility of n units minus total utility from n minus 1 units. Now, after defining the concepts of utility, that is total utility and marginal utility, let us now explain that what is law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility is one of the fundamental laws of economics. This law states that as the quantity consumed of a commodity goes on increasing, the utility derived from each successive unit goes on diminishing, consumption of all other commodities remaining the same. For example, if I start consuming a product, say ice cream, keeping the consumption of all other commodities constant, the utility which I will derive from each successive cup of ice cream goes on diminishing. This law basically applies on all kinds of consumer goods which are durable or non-durable goods sooner or later. Now, assumptions of this law, that is the basic limitations on which this law will work, are that the unit of the consumer goods must be a standard one. That is, if I am consuming ice cream, I will be consuming 1 cup of ice cream every time. If I am consuming apple, I will be consuming 1 apple every time. It should be standard one, means it should be measurable. Then the consumer's taste and preference must remain the same during the period of consumption. For example, if I am very hungry and if I start consuming apple, I should not, like after consuming 1 unit of apple, I should not switch over my consumption to some other commodity. Then there must be continuity in consumption. Continuity in consumption refers to that if I am consuming a particular product, it should not be that I am consuming 1 unit in the morning and the other unit in the evening. I should be consuming it within a standard gap, say within 5 to 10 minutes or say within half an hour. The gap should be standard one. Next, the mental condition of the consumer must remain normal during the period of consumption. That is, the person should not be drunk while he is consuming, because then his mental level will not be stable, so he won't be able to identify the utility from the consumption of a commodity. Now, in order to further explain the law, we'll do that with the help of a schedule and a graph. Suppose a consumer has started consuming a commodity X, and the marginal utility schedule and the total utility schedule of the commodity X is given. total utility of consumption from consumption of X, then marginal utility from consumption of X. Suppose from the consumption of 1 unit he derives a total utility of say 30. From consumption of 2 units he derived total utility of 50. From consumption of 3 units he derives a total utility of 60. Then 4 units 65, and after that his total utility from consumption of the same commodity X starts declining. Same way we can also calculate from the given total utility, we can calculate the marginal utility. First unit it will be 30. Now second unit, as marginal utility is the change in total utility by consuming one additional unit. So 50 minus 30, it is 20 from consumption of second unit. 60 minus 50, it is 10 from the consumption of third unit. Then 65 minus 60, it is 5 from the consumption of fourth unit. Then 60 minus 65, it is minus 5 from the consumption of fifth unit. And 45 minus 60, it will be minus 15 from the consumption of sixth unit. So we can see here in this particular schedule that as the person, as the consumer goes on increasing the consumption of commodity X, his total utility initially increases, but after a certain level it starts diminishing. And same is the effect of marginal utility. From the very first unit of consumption, the marginal utility is constantly decreasing, and after a certain point of time period it becomes negative. Thus it is saying that thus the law of diminishing marginal utility is operating. It is very much clear from this particular schedule that as the consumption of commodity X goes on increasing, the total utility increases but at a diminishing rate, which can be depicted from the decreasing marginal utility. Now if we have to plot this graphically, we can do that. Suppose this is a graph. On x-axis I take the quantity, and on y-axis I take the utility, which is total utility and marginal utility. Now because we have seen through the schedule that total utility is diminishing from the very starting, total utility is increasing up till a certain point and then it starts diminishing after that point. So the total utility curve will go somewhat like this. This is the maximum total utility derived from the consumption of commodity X, this particular point. Whereas marginal utility from the very beginning is diminishing. It goes somewhat like this. This is the total utility curve and this is the marginal utility curve from the consumption of commodity X. The graph very well depicts that when the total utility is increasing, marginal utility is diminishing. When the total utility is maximum, marginal utility is minimum. And when total utility has started diminishing, marginal utility becomes negative. Thus we can move on to three conclusions from the law of diminishing marginal utility, that when TU is increasing, MU is decreasing, then when TU, that is total utility, is maximum, MU is minimum, then when total utility is diminishing, marginal utility becomes negative. Now, as we have understood the law of diminishing marginal utility with the help of a graph and a schedule, I would like to explain you further that why the marginal utility curve decreases. Basically, the utility of a commodity, the satisfaction derived from a commodity, depends upon the intensity of the desire for it. For example, if I am very hungry, I will derive the maximum satisfaction from the consumption of a product, food product. But when a person consumes successive units of a commodity, his need is satisfied by degrees in the process of consumption of the commodity, and the intensity of his need goes on decreasing. Therefore, the utility obtained from each successive units goes on decreasing. I would like to further conclude that law of diminishing marginal utility applies on each and every product sooner or later, whether it is a durable consumer good or a non-durable consumer good. In some cases, for example, accumulation of money, collection of hobby items like stamps, old coins, etc., rare paintings and books, etc., the marginal utility may initially increase rather than decrease, but ultimately it has to decrease. Thus, as a matter of fact, the law of marginal utility generally operates universally.